I found them huddled under the highway bridge in the pouring rain. A man clutching a feverish baby to his chest, both soaked through, trembling in the cold. And then my breath caught. That man wasn't a stranger. He was my grandson. For 30 years I had lived with the wound of my son's betrayal carved deep into me. The emptied accounts, the years of silence, the night my husband clutched his chest and collapsed when he realized everything we had built was gone. I thought I knew the shape of pain. I thought I had grown used to its sharpness. But nothing prepared me for this moment, standing ankle-deep in mud rain, soaking my hair, an expensive coat, staring at Spencer's eyes in a face I had never seen before. "James Sterling," I whispered, though my voice was nearly swallowed by the storm. His head snapped up, suspicion blazing in his eyes, as he shifted his body to shield the child. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice rough, protective, desperate. I swallowed hard. "My name is Alice Sterling," I said, crouching down so I wouldn't tower above him. "I know your father told you I was dead, but I'm your grandmother." The look on his face, disbelief, fear, exhaustion. And in that flicker, I knew everything was about to change. 3 days before, I had been sitting in my penthouse in Florida, staring at a thin black folder that had sat on my desk far too long. My assistant had placed it there silently, knowing better than to comment. I had ignored it while drinking my coffee, making phone calls, shuffling papers, all the while pretending it wasn't waiting for me. But I knew. I knew the weight of secrets that folder carried. When I finally opened it, my hand shook. Inside was the final report from the investigator I had hired, a 6-page chronicle of my grandson's collapse into poverty. His name. His age. 28. A factory worker laid off. A father to a baby girl. A man stripped of everything, now living unhoused in Ohio. And the words that broke me most: request denied. James had called his parents my son Gregory, and his wife Brenda, asking for help, for a roof, for anything. They turned him away. Cold. Just as Gregory had once turned his back on me and his own father, stealing our savings, vanishing into comfort, while leaving us to rot. Some patterns, I thought bitterly, never break. But when I turned to the last page of that report, the breath left my body. A grainy photograph. James hunched beneath a bridge, a bundle in his arms. A child's hand reaching for his face. My great-granddaughter. My Spencer's blood shivering in the dark. For 30 years, I had been a ghost in my own life. After Spencer's heart gave out the day Gregory robbed us, I filled my days with business, hiding in marble and glass. The women on my charity committees called me an ice queen. They weren't wrong, but they never knew that ice can preserve things: rage, grief, and purpose. That night, staring at the photograph, something inside me thawed. I pressed the intercom. "Margaret, prepare the jet. I'm going to Ohio." When I stepped out of the car that rainy afternoon, the storm nearly drowned me. I sank into mud, the stench of exhaust and poverty choking my throat. Yet I didn't hesitate. My Italian shoes ruined, my umbrella nearly useless. I walked toward that broken tent, toward my grandson. The baby's cry reached me before I reached them. Not the strong, angry cry of health, but a thin, exhausted whimper. I quickened my steps, my heart hammering. And then I saw him, my grandson. Spencer's jawline etched in a young man's tired face. A father clinging to his child with the last scraps of strength he had left. "She's burning up," I said softly, nodding toward the baby. "She has a fever." "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice raw with suspicion. "We don't have anything left to steal." "I'm not here to take," I whispered, crouching until my knees sank into the mud. "I'm here because I'm your grandmother." He stared, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "My father told me you were dead," Gregory lied. At the sound of his father's name, James flinched. For a moment, the suspicion in his eyes faltered, replaced by a weariness too heavy for his years. He looked down at the baby in his arms. "She's been like this for 3 days, he admitted hoarsely. "The ER said it was just a cold. Gave me Tylenol and sent us away." I drew a steadying breath. "I have a car waiting. Warm, dry. There's food, and I can have a doctor see her within the hour." He let out a bitter laugh, hollow and sharp. "Right. And what do you want in return?" "Nothing you aren't willing to give," I told him firmly. "This isn't about trust. It's about your daughter's life." He looked down at her, then at the tiny hand curled against his chest. Her name is Sophie, he whispered. I repeated it softly, almost reverently. Sophie, Spencer would have loved that name. James searched my face for deception for the lies he'd been raised on. But all he saw was the same exhaustion he carried himself. Finally, he said, 1 hour. We'll go with you for 1 hour. If I don't like what I hear, we walk. And so we left the bridge behind. The collapsing tent, the mud, the ghosts of betrayal. He carried Sophie, still feverish but alive, into the warmth of my car. And as the door closed for the first time in decades, I felt the faintest flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, our family's curse of betrayal could be broken. The ride to the airstrip was silent except for Sophie's soft whimpers. I sat across from James, my hands folded tightly in my lap, afraid that if I reached for her too soon, he would shut down completely. His body was curled protectively around her, his eyes darting between me and the blur of the storm through the tinted window. He looked more like a cornered animal than a man, and the mother in me wanted to weep. When the car pulled into the hangar, James stiffened. His eyes widened as the sleek jet came into view, polished steel glinting under floodlights. You brought us here, he asked, suspicion laced with disbelief. Why? What game are you playing? No game, I said softly. Just safety, warmth, a chance to breathe. He didn't move at first, but when Sophie coughed a rattling sound that shook even me, he relented. He climbed the steps, still clutching her like she might be stolen from his arms. Once inside, the cabin's heat wrapped around us. I ordered tea broth blankets. A doctor I had on standby arrived within minutes, his black bag snapping open on the leather seat beside Sophie. James hovered as the man examined her, his hands trembling. She's dehydrated, the doctor murmured. Nothing too serious if treated properly. Fever should come down in 24 hours. He scribbled prescriptions, handed me a list of supplies, and within minutes my staff were already arranging deliveries to my home. Relief washed over James's face, but only for a moment. Then his gaze flicked back to me, sharp, mistrusting. Why are you doing this? He demanded. Why now? Where were you when Dad told me you were gone, when Mom said you'd abandoned us? The question pierced me deeper than he knew. Where had I been, trapped in grief, in shame, in anger that calcified until I became unrecognizable even to myself? I looked into his eyes, Spencer's eyes, and for the first time in years I spoke the truth out loud. I was here, I whispered, alive, mourning your grandfather, mourning the family I thought I'd lost. Your father told you I was dead because he couldn't bear you knowing the truth, that he abandoned me, that he stole everything, that he is the reason we were torn apart. James blinked, his lips parting, the disbelief and betrayal twisting his face. He lied to me, he breathed like a child waking from a nightmare. All these years. I nodded, my throat tight. I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped hoping I'd find you. When I saw that photograph, I broke off, unable to finish. For the first time, his shoulders sagged. The suspicion cracked. He looked down at Sophie, stroking her damp hair. I didn't think anyone cared. I thought this was it. Just me and her against the world. I reached across the table slowly, gently. He didn't pull away when my fingers brushed Sophie's tiny hand. She was burning hot, but her grip was surprisingly strong. My great-granddaughter. The living proof that something good could still survive in the ashes of betrayal. As the jet lifted, James sat back exhausted. The hum of the engines lulled Sophie into a restless sleep, her fevered breaths finally slowing. James leaned his head against the leather seat, his eyes half closed. 1 hour, he muttered, reminding himself, reminding me. 1 hour, I agreed, but inside I knew this was just the beginning. When we landed in Florida, the night air was heavy with salt and warmth, so different from the bitter Ohio rain. My staff whisked us into waiting cars. James looked out the window as the city skyline rose, bright towers, gleaming streets alive with neon. His jaw clenched tighter with each mile. I don't belong here, he said finally, his voice sharp with resentment. You belong anywhere your child is safe, I told him. That's all that matters. The gates to my estate swung open, revealing manicured lawns, glowing windows, fountains that seemed obscene after the mud-soaked bridge he had left behind. His grip on Sophie tightened again. This isn't real life, he whispered. It's survival, I corrected gently, and it's yours now if you'll have it. Inside, he wandered the marble foyer like a man in a dream. Sophie stirred her fever, breaking just enough for her to whimper. I led them upstairs to a guest suite, soft bed, clean sheets, warm light. James laid her down slowly, carefully, his eyes shining in the dim glow. He turned to me, then his defenses stripped bare. "If this is real," he said, voice breaking, "if you're really my grandmother, don't disappear again." The words shattered me. I wanted to promise, to swear I would never let him down. But I knew trust wasn't rebuilt in a night. It had to be earned brick by brick after decades of silence. So I said only this: "I'm here now, and I'm not leaving." That night, as rain lashed against the windows of a house too big for one broken woman, I sat by Sophie's bedside, watching her fever ease. James finally slept, his arm curled protectively around her. And for the first time in 30 years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe love could still be salvaged from the ruins. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the curtains, warming the polished floors of the guest room where James lay curled around his daughter. Sophie's fever had broken some time before dawn. Her tiny chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm, her damp curls pressed to James's shirt. He looked younger in that moment, almost like the boy he must have once been, not the exhausted man I had found under a bridge. I lingered in the doorway, a tray of breakfast trembling in my hands. When he finally stirred, his eyes flicked toward me with guarded awareness. He sat up slowly, smoothing Sophie's hair. "We'll eat, then we'll go," he said immediately, his voice gravelly from sleep. "You don't have to rush," I answered, setting the tray down on the bedside table. "Eggs, toast, fruit, a glass of orange juice." He stared at it as if it were a trapped suspicion tugging at his mouth. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you doing this?" I swallowed, knowing there was no easy answer. "Because I failed your father," I whispered. "I let him slip into the shadows. I lost him to greed, to lies, and I won't lose you too." James's eyes darkened at the mention of Gregory. He shook his head. "He always said you abandoned him, that you didn't care about me or about anyone but yourself." His gaze flicked over the high ceilings, the luxury around us. Looking at all this, it made sense. I stepped closer, my voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and rage. "He abandoned us, James. Your grandfather and I gave him everything: education, love, opportunity, and he stole not just money, but trust, dignity, family. When your grandfather collapsed from the shock, I was left alone with grief so heavy it crushed me for decades. And then Gregory told you I was dead, so you would never find me. He wanted to erase me so his lies would never unravel." James's jaw tightened. His hand curled into a fist on the blanket. "So all those nights when I thought you didn't care." His voice cracked and he pressed his lips together. "He lied." I nodded. Tears blurred my vision. "Yes, he lied." The silence stretched between us, heavy with truths too long buried. Sophie stirred, blinking her sleepy eyes, and James bent instantly, pressing his lips to her forehead. Watching him, my heart swelled with both sorrow and fierce pride. Here was a man abandoned, betrayed, yet still fighting to be the father his own could never be. Later that day, I arranged for a pediatrician to visit the house. James hovered nervously, his arms crossed as the doctor examined Sophie and assured us she would recover fully with proper rest and nutrition. Relief washed over me, but James's shoulders remained tense, his eyes darting constantly around the room, as if expecting someone to take everything away again. At lunch, he barely touched the food. Finally, he looked at me across the table. "What happens now? You take us in for a week, make yourself feel better. Then send us back out when you're done playing savior." His words stung, but I didn't flinch. "What happens now," I said quietly, "is whatever you decide. You can leave. I won't stop you. But you and Sophie will always have a place here, not out of pity, out of love." The word seemed to catch him off guard. Love. It hung in the air between us, fragile and foreign. That night I heard him pacing the halls after Sophie fell asleep. I found him standing at the window of the library, staring out at the gardens below. His voice was low, almost a confession. "I don't know how to trust this. Every time I've trusted, it's been ripped away. My dad, my mom, people who should have cared, they just walked." I stepped closer, laying a hand on his shoulder. Then let this be different. Let this be the start of something that doesn't break. He looked at me, then his face raw, vulnerable, haunted. If you're lying, if this is just another story, I won't survive it. Not again. And he said, glancing toward Sophie's room, she deserves better than broken promises. I know, I whispered, and I won't break this one. For the first time, his shoulders eased, if only slightly. He nodded as though allowing himself one fragile thread of belief. And in that moment, I realized this was no simple act of charity. This was redemption, a chance to stitch together what betrayal had torn apart. But deep down, I knew Gregory's shadow still loomed over us. His lies, his greed, they weren't done with us yet. And sooner or later, James would have to face not just the truth of his father's past, but the weight of his own bloodline. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon of silence. James remained cautious, every gesture measured, every word filtered through suspicion. He was polite but distant, keeping me at arm's length even as he allowed Sophie to settle into the warmth of my home. But children have a way of disarming walls adults spend lifetimes building. Sophie giggled when the housekeeper blew bubbles for her in the garden. She tugged on my pearls with her tiny fists, babbling happily in my lap. And little by little, James's eyes softened as he watched her find safety where there had only been fear. One evening, I invited James into the music room where an old grand piano waited under a dust cloth. Your grandfather used to play, I told him as I pulled the cover away. The ivory keys gleamed faintly in the dim light. It was the one thing that calmed Gregory when he was your age. James hesitated, then sat down. His fingers brushed the keys uncertainly before he pressed a single note. The sound rang clear, filling the room with a bittersweet echo. I closed my eyes, memories flooding back, Spencer's hands on the keys, Gregory's childish laughter, a family once whole. James played a simple melody, halting and uneven, but it was music nonetheless. When he stopped, he looked at me, something unreadable in his expression. He never told me any of this, he said quietly. All I ever heard was how you ruined everything. The bitterness in his voice was like acid. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Your father couldn't bear his own guilt, so he turned it into blame. It was easier to paint me as the villain than to admit what he'd done. James's jaw clenched, his hands tightened into fists. He stole my childhood, he muttered, made me believe lies. And now, he trailed off, shaking his head. Now I don't even know who I am. The pain in his voice shattered me. I wanted to reach out to gather him in my arms the way I should have when he was small, but I held back, afraid the gesture would push him further away. Instead, I said softly, "You are not your father. You are your own man. And everything I see in you, the way you protect Sophie, the way you fight for her, that is strength he never had." His eyes glistened, but he blinked the tears away quickly, turning his face from me. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, filled only by the echo of the piano's last note. The following week, I arranged a visit to the attorney who handled my estate. James was hesitant, even hostile at first. "I don't want your money," he snapped when I told him. "I don't need charity." "This isn't charity," I explained gently. "It's legacy. It's a way to ensure Sophie never has to live the way you just did, under a bridge in fear and hunger." Samas. His shoulders stiffened. He looked at me with fire in his eyes. "Don't think you can buy me or her." "I don't want to buy you," I whispered. "I want to protect you. Both of you. Because no one protected me when Gregory betrayed us. I won't let that cycle repeat." He didn't respond, but I saw the conflict in his eyes. The desperate need to provide for Sophie warred with the pride that had kept him alive on the streets. I didn't push him. I knew wounds like his couldn't be healed with documents or signatures. That night, I found him standing outside Sophie's room, watching her sleep. His voice was low, almost broken. "She deserves a family," he murmured. "A real one. Not just me trying to survive day by day." I stepped beside him, laying my hand over his. "Then let's give her one." For the first time, he didn't pull away. But just as hope began to stitch us together, the past came crashing back. A phone call, unexpected and sharp as broken glass, cut through the fragile peace. When I answered, a familiar voice slithered down the line. "Gregory." "My son." "Mother," he said smoothly, as if decades hadn't passed, as if he hadn't abandoned me and stolen everything I had. I hear you've been busy playing savior, taking in strays, taking in my son. My blood turned cold. My hand trembled around the receiver. He knew. Somehow he knew. I want to see him, Gregory continued. And the baby, they're mine after all. Blood is blood. You can't keep them from me. The bile rose in my throat. James appeared in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes narrowing as he guessed who was on the other end. Don't you dare, he hissed, his voice shaking with fury. Don't you dare let him near us. And in that instant I knew the battle was far from over. Gregory's shadow hadn't just loomed, it had found its way back into our lives, demanding a place at the table he had burned to the ground. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles whitened, but my voice stayed level. You lost the right to call them yours the day you abandoned us all. I said, each word carved out of the years of grief he had left me with. Gregory's laugh slithered down the line, mocking venomous. You think you can just swoop in now after decades? You think James will choose you over his own father? I raised him. I made him. And if you try to turn him against me, you'll regret it. The line went dead before I could respond, leaving only the hum of silence. I lowered the receiver slowly, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. James stood in the doorway, fists clenched, his face pale with fury. I don't want to see him, he said, his voice low but sharp. Not ever. But his trembling gave him away. He was terrified not of Gregory's presence, but of the power his father still held over him, the scars of a childhood built on lies. That night James couldn't sleep. I found him in the study, pacing like a caged animal, his hands buried in his hair. He's not going to stop, he muttered. He'll come here. He'll try to take Sophie. He'll ruin everything just like he always has. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to promise him safety. But I knew Gregory too well. My son was relentless. He had stolen, lied, destroyed, and walked away without remorse. And now the threat of losing the only family I had left made the old fury burn hotter than ever before. The next morning, Gregory's shadow became flesh. He arrived at the gates of my estate, his car idling, his suit pressed, his smile smug. The guard called me, his voice uneasy. He says he's family, says he wants to see his son and granddaughter. I walked down the drive myself, each step steady, though my heart thundered inside my chest. When I reached the gate, there he was, my son. Older, grayer, but the same sly arrogance in his eyes. Mother, he said, his tone falsely sweet. You look well, money suits you. Get out, I told him coldly. You're not welcome here. His eyes flicked past me toward the house. Is he inside, James, my boy? He deserves to hear from me. He deserves to know the truth. The truth, I spat. You wouldn't know the truth if it strangled you. But then James's voice cut through the air. Don't bother, Grandma. I'll tell him myself. I turned horrified as James strode out of the house, Sophie balanced on his hip. His face was pale but determined. He stopped just inside the gate, his eyes locked on his father's. You lied to me my whole life, he said, his voice shaking but strong. You told me she was dead. You made me believe I had no one. You stole everything, not just money, but trust, love, family. And now you want to come back. His voice cracked, but he stood tall. You don't get to. Gregory's smile faltered. He opened his mouth, but James cut him off. You're not my father. You never were. A father doesn't abandon, doesn't steal, doesn't lie. A father protects. And you destroyed everything. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Gregory's face twisted, a flicker of something, shame perhaps, or rage, but he masked it quickly. He leaned against his car, smirking again. We'll see, he said smoothly. Blood has a way of pulling people back. You'll need me one day, James. And when you do, I'll be waiting. He climbed back into his car and drove away, leaving dust and poison in his wake. James stood frozen, his chest heaving, Sophie clinging to him with wide, confused eyes. I walked to him slowly, laying my hand on his trembling arm. He looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw the boy he had been, the boy lost in lies, and the man he was becoming, strong enough to finally reject them. Inside the house, he sank into a chair, his whole body shaking. I thought facing him would make me feel free, he whispered. But it just feels empty. I knelt before him, taking his hands in mine. That emptiness, I said softly, is the space where his chains used to be. It hurts now, but it means you're finally free to fill it with something better. He looked down at Sophie, then back at me. and for the first time there was no suspicion in his eyes, only trust. But even as I held that moment close, I knew Gregory wasn't gone. Men like him don't simply walk away. And when he returned, as I knew he it would test us both in ways neither of us could yet imagine. The days after Gregory's visit felt strangely quiet, but the silence was heavy, not peaceful. James carried himself differently, straighter, firmer, but I could see the turmoil churning beneath. Every time the phone rang, every time a car slowed near the gates, his shoulders tensed. He was waiting for his father's shadow to fall again. I tried to fill the house with gentleness. Sophie's laughter echoed down the halls as she discovered toys, soft blankets, and the joy of having her belly full every night. James began to relax in fleeting moments, teaching her to stack blocks, walking with her in the garden, even smiling at me across the breakfast table. Each small act felt like a stitch in the fabric of a family we were slowly, painfully weaving back together. But Gregory haunted us still. Letters arrived, slipped past the guards, tucked into the mailbox. Empty apologies veiled threats, manipulative words crafted to reopen wounds. James ripped them to shreds before I could read them. "He doesn't get space in our lives anymore," he said, his voice fierce, protective. I saw Spencer's strength in him. Then, the strength of the man I had once loved and lost. One evening, James sat me down in the library. He held Sophie on his knee, her little hands patting his face as he spoke. "I need to know if this is real," he said, looking at me with eyes raw and unflinching. "You say you'll be here, that you won't disappear, that you love us. But I've lived too long in lies. I need to know if I can build a future here or if this is just temporary." I took a deep breath, my heart aching with both guilt and love. "James," I said softly, "I can't undo the years we lost. I can't change the pain your father caused. But I can promise you this, I will not abandon you. Not now, not ever. You and Sophie are my family, and family once found is worth fighting for." He looked down at his daughter, then back at me, and slowly, a tear slid down his cheek. Then maybe he whispered, "We can finally stop running." From that day forward, something shifted. James began to trust, not fully, not all at once, but enough to let the walls crumble piece by piece. He accepted help, with Sophie began sketching plans for work, even talked about going back to school. The pride in his eyes when he spoke of building a life for her, honest, stable, safe, was brighter than any arrogance Gregory had ever shown. Months passed. Gregory never stopped lurking, but his grip on James loosened with every new memory we created. Birthdays with cake and laughter. Walks on the beach with Sophie toddling between us. Quiet evenings where James and I sat side by side, the silence no longer filled with suspicion, but with peace. One night, as Sophie slept soundly in her crib, James stood at the window, the moonlight painting his face silver. "Do you think," he asked, his voice quiet, "that it's possible to break a curse, to stop a family from repeating the same betrayals over and over?" I joined him, slipping my arm through his. "Yes," I said firmly, "because curses only live if we feed them. And you, James, you've already chosen to starve his legacy. By loving Sophie, by protecting her, by being everything your father never was." He closed his eyes, a deep breath shuddering through him, and when he opened them again there was no shadow left, only light. I had spent 30 years drowning in grief, in rage, in betrayal, but in that moment I understood something I had never allowed myself to believe, that healing doesn't always come from the people who broke you. Sometimes it comes from the ones who survived alongside you. James and Sophie were not just my second chance. They were proof that even the deepest wounds can grow into something whole again. If you've ever carried the weight of betrayal, if you've ever felt abandoned by those who should have loved you most, know this family is not always defined by blood. Sometimes it is the people who choose to stay, who choose to fight, who choose to love you when they could walk away. That is the family worth keeping. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, do you believe family curses can be broken, or do they always come back to haunt us? I'd love to hear your thoughts.